My accent is real. I am from England originally, grew up in London and Surrey, moved out to Switzerland, educated in Switzerland, and then lived in the Bahamas and then came over here. I have 3 kids, twin 23-year-olds and 27-year-olds. My daughters, one's a ballet dancer, the other one is in childcare, and then my son lives in Los Angeles and is a graphic designer. Princess is 11 years old. We got her when she was a pup from the pound, and she is a Dachshund Lab mix. Princess would describe me as not only the person that gives her food, but also the person that lets her do almost anything she wants to do. Dad. My approach to solving problems for clients is really to listen to them. I try not to jump to conclusions and come up with a solution before I really understood exactly what they're looking for, what they think they need, and spend some time with them. And then I can sort of work with them to come up with a solution, because I think if I come up with a solution on my own, sometimes it's not the right one. So my process for problem solving with a client generally is to spend anywhere from 15 minutes to 30 minutes trying to understand the type of issues they're dealing with, what they're worried about, and then I generally come up with almost a risk analysis of how much risk are they prepared to take. From there, oftentimes there's some sort of documentation or advice that needs to be given. Provide that to them, let them think about it, and then get back a couple of days later to sort of finalize whatever the plan of action is for the client. Their risks basically will range from 1 to 5 is probably the best way to put it, where 1, they essentially have no risk, and 5, there's an extremely high risk of whatever they're planning on doing. And when I say high risk, it could even be criminal issues. It's rare that anything is either a 1 or a 5. And essentially the idea is to explain to the client, if you choose option A, that may be perhaps a 1.5 risk or a 2 risk. If you choose option B, it could be a 3 risk. So most decisions that sophisticated individuals and corporations need to make are sort of on a risk gradient where items are gray, and we try to sort of explain the risks, explain if you do this or if you do that, perhaps you will increase or reduce your level of risk, and essentially it's what they're comfortable with doing. So the relationships I build with a client really come from the base of my years of practice, where the majority of my legal work has been in-house. So when you're generally an in-house counsel, you spend about 50% of your time practicing law and about 50% of your time interacting with senior management in trying to educate them on the risks associated with their decision. So I think helping people understand a risk and perhaps giving it a number helps people begin to understand the consequences of their decisions. Probably the biggest win for a client is to help them navigate a pretty bad situation where they had a data breach and their PHI, private health information, was viewed by various criminals in many different countries. And their list of clients included individuals in many different countries, the UK, the EU, the US, Canada, Brazil, and everything else. And as a result of that, we had to make a lot of public disclosures on the data breach. And that really worried the corporation from both a regulatory perspective. They could have been fined, they could have been shut down, and it took about a year to work with all the international regulators to essentially persuade the regulators that there was relatively little damage done to the corporation and minimal disclosure of very private health information. It took a lot of the management time, it took a lot of legal work, but ultimately the company made it through. They tightened up their security protocols. I learned a lot of lessons, they learned a lot of lessons, and I think obviously they wouldn't want to go through that again, but ultimately the outcome was pretty good for them. I'm a bit of an exercise nut is probably the best way to put it. I've done many Ironmans. which probably shows that I have good genes and poor judgment. I sometimes push myself, maybe perhaps just a little bit too hard, so sometimes I need to take things just a little bit easier, and that's very difficult to do. My dream client would probably be a startup in the healthcare space. And I actually do represent some startups in the healthcare space. So I would say that I may have the dream client today. I'm really not sure. It really depends upon where the client goes, how quickly the company grows, what the issues are associated with it. But I would say it would be in the healthcare space that has a very strong IT need. That would be the ideal client, healthcare and IT. So in my 30+ years of practicing, I've seen many things, and a couple of items come to mind in dealing with some clients who do emergency air evacuation. One of them, which would probably be a good education for a lot of people actually on cruises, is, I don't know whether you've ever been on a cruise or not, but most of the doors on cruises are electronic, and they're very similar to when you go to a supermarket and the doors just open and then close automatically. But what people don't actually realize is the doors on cruise ships, especially the ones to the outside, close a lot faster than they do at the supermarket. And it's quite common for people as they're going through not to judge the speed of the door closing, and it clips the back of their ankles, and they fall, and they tend to fall flat in their face very quickly. So, and then ultimately there needs to be emergency evacuation from the ships. Second item is a lot of folks from not necessarily the US but Canada and the UK go over to Cuba, and they like to rent the 1950s cars. What they don't realize is the cars may look very nice from the outside, but they're actually inside. They're made of many different parts from different cars, and they tend to break down relatively often. And those 1950 cars have a lot of very sharp corners, and so it's actually reasonably common for folks to get into car accidents in Cuba and get pretty badly injured on the sharp points of the 1950s cars, and then have to be evacuated by an air ambulance. And those are your safety tips when you're on a cruise or when you're renting a car in Cuba. Another trend I'm seeing in some of my clients is in the med spa area. What people are surprised to find out is that there needs to be a level of medical supervision, and oftentimes that medical supervision needs to be a dermatologist or a plastic surgeon. And what the med spa folks are finding out is it's difficult to find a physician to provide medical supervision. And it wouldn't surprise me if there are many med spa clients out there, or med spas out there that are not our clients, that don't have the appropriate level of medical supervision. And frankly, the regulators are beginning to recognize this, and in fact there has been some arrests recently for folks who are practicing medicine without a license. Knock on wood, they're not our clients. Also, the other trend is there's a huge growth in the IV industry. And again, there needs to be an appropriate level of medical supervision, because you are injecting people with substances that some people could be allergic to. Some people have died from this. It's not to be taken lightly. You have to comply with the rules and the regulations. Otherwise, again, you are practicing medicine without a license. And that, in almost every state, is a criminal offense. So if I were to go to a med spa, the service that I would probably get would be a little different from most folks, because my wife is a dermatologist and essentially does run a small med spa as part of her practice. So if I were to go to a med spa, it'd probably be my wife's, and when I went there, the service I would receive is there'd be a lot of honeydews that I need to take care of within there, so I wouldn't get any service. I just get a lot of work when I'm visiting my wife's practice.
And what would Princess have done at the med spa?
I think probably she would. She's pretty gray, and we, people who see her face, they always wonder how old she is. She probably would get some darkening of the skin or removing of some of her gray hairs. So.